Imagine you're reading this text, and the rhythm of the words, I mean, it sounds like it was just unearthed from an ancient, dusty desert cave.
Oh, yeah, like a lost scroll or something.
Exactly. It's written in this sweeping, poetic, deeply prophetic style. It speaks of the new world order, of humanity stripped down to its core. You would swear you were holding a lost book of Isaiah.
Right, it has that exact cadence.
But then, you look at the publication date, and you discover it was penned in the 21st century by a millennial independent investor.
Which is just a massive juxtaposition right there.
It totally is.
Yeah.
And here's the element that fundamentally alters how you read every single word. He wrote it while simultaneously experiencing a severe, life-altering schizophrenic breakdown.
It's wild. It creates this staggering collision of worlds, honestly.
Yeah, collision is the perfect word for it.
Because, we are culturally conditioned to view these things as totally binary. You are either having a profound spiritual awakening or you are experiencing a terrifying medical emergency.
Right. It has to be one or the other.
Exactly. But what happens when you look closely at a mind where those two events are entirely indistinguishable?
Well, today, you, me, and our expert are going on a deep dive into that exact fragile intersection.
And it is fragile, very fragile.
We are unpacking the ultimate survival guide, basically, written by a man whose own mind was actively trying to destroy him. We have a stack of primary material by an author named NathanOr BenZvi.
It's a heavy stack, too.
Yeah, it's dense. We're going to look at his spiritual blueprint, which is a text called BABASHUVA, and then we are going to strip down the actual neurobiology of his psychotic breaks.
Which he details in his raw autobiography, Divine Schizophrenia.
Right. And we're going to figure out how someone uses ancient theology and highly specific sound waves to literally shield a fracturing mind.
The dialogue between these two texts is really what makes this so compelling.
Yeah. How so?
Well, you have the grand unifying vision on one side and then the agonizing neurological cost of receiving that vision on the other. You can't really untangle them.
No, you can't. So let's start with the vision itself and just immerse ourselves in the spiritual world of BABASHUVA.
Let's do it.
When you first open this text, the tone is, well, it's disorienting because it demands to be read like scripture.
It does, very aggressively so.
Yeah, Nathan deliberately uses an archaic biblical cadence. He uses heavy metaphors, speaking of the days of Trump and Netanyahu, but formatting it as if he's documenting the kings of ancient Judah.
Which is a brilliant, if maybe instinctive, stylistic choice on his part.
Really? You think it's a deliberate psychological tactic?
I mean, when you write in the cadence of scripture, you aren't just making an aesthetic decision. You are utilizing a specific rhythmic structure that historically bypasses our modern cynical analytical filters.
Oh, wow. You ever thought about it like that?
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's constantly evaluating the logic of the text, it kind of takes a back seat. The rhythm taps directly into a deeper, almost ancestral resonance.
So it just automatically commands authority.
Exactly. It makes a modern plea for geopolitical unity feel incredibly timeless.
And the ideology he's trying to slip past those cynical filters, it's radical in its simplicity. It's this phrase he repeats over and over.
Under the flesh, we are all human.
Yes. He strips it down to pure biological reductionism. Skin, bones, tendons, and flesh. That is his great equalizer.
He takes the entirety of the human experience, every societal label, every religious dogma, every border dispute, and he violently scrapes it away to leave only our basic anatomy.
Which is such a striking image.
Because if you can get the reader to accept that baseline premise, that biologically we're completely identical, the logical leap to his next point is unavoidable.
Right, which is his absolute demand for peace.
Exactly. He uses this anatomical baseline to call for an end to war, specifically demanding peace among the three major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
He writes that the path of war is literally the path of Cain killing Abel, like it is inherently anti-divine.
Yeah, he doesn't mince words there.
But he doesn't stop at world peace. He turns that exact same critical lens on modern daily life.
He really goes after our modern attachments.
Yeah, he goes after what he calls the worship of electricity and iron and idols of silver and gold.
It's a very sharp modernization of the oldest critique in the biblical playbook, honestly.
Like the golden calf.
Exactly. In the ancient texts, prophets were screaming at people for worshiping golden calves. Nathan is essentially saying, well, we never stopped worshiping idols. We just learned how to plug them into the wall.
Oh, man. That is entirely too accurate.
Right. He argues we worship our infrastructure, our digital validation, our devices. And in doing so, we become completely blind to the living, breathing human being standing right in front of us.
It makes me think about someone trying to fix a computer that's just bogged down with malware.
Like a virus scan.
Yeah, all these pop-ups and viruses ruining the system.
Oh.
Nathan's critique of modern religion and society feels like someone trying to clear away centuries of malicious software updates.
To get back to the clean operating system.
Yeah.
Exactly. Back to the original operating system of basic human connection. He specifically rejects the oral Torah in Judaism, the centuries of rabbinic interpretation, and just calls it an invention of man.
I'd actually push back on the malware analogy just a bit, though.
How come?
Well, malware implies malicious intent, like someone deliberately tried to ruin the system. It's more like legacy code.
Legacy code. Okay, explain that.
It's software that worked perfectly for the social hardware of 2,000 years ago, but when you try to run that ancient code on a hyper-connected modern operating system, it just crashes.
Ah, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
By rejecting the oral Torah, Nathan is telling the religious authorities, your legacy code is too complicated and it's making the system crash. He wants a direct, unmediated return to the source code. Love, compassion, and grace.
He even tries to rewrite the user interface, so to speak.
With the symbols.
Yeah, he introduces these physical symbols for his followers to replace complex rituals. He suggests men wear a gold necklace with the Shema Yisrael prayer, and the women wear a necklace depicting a reddish rose or a blood moon.
Right. He is actively building a new visual identity for this movement. But there's a massive paradox here that we have to talk about.
The prophet issue.
Yes, he is writing in the voice of a prophet, delivering these heavy biblical commandments. Yet, within the text itself, he aggressively rejects the title of prophet.
He insists over and over that he is merely a son of man upon whom the Spirit of God fell.
Why do that? Why use the voice but reject the title?
That is a crucial grounding mechanism. You have to remember the psychological tightrope he is walking here. The text itself shows a desperate attempt to maintain self-awareness.
To not lose himself completely to the delusion.
Exactly. He writes, don't call me God, don't call me an angel, don't call me the Messiah, call me a son of man. He recognizes the absolute danger of elevating himself to a deity.
Which forces you, the reader, to constantly shift your footing.
It really does.
I mean, how do you process a text that literally says, the word of the Lord came to me, but then you realize the author is trading in the capital markets on a Tuesday?
Right. It forces you to divorce the message from the messenger.
Which is hard to do.
It is. But if the core argument is stop killing each other because your anatomy is identical, does the validity of that statement change depending on whether it comes from an ancient mystic or a modern investor grappling with his own mind?
Oh, that's a great point. It challenges you to find truth based on the merit of the words rather than the pedigree of the author.
Exactly.
Well, that sets up the lofty spiritual atmosphere of BABASHUVA.
Yeah.
But if we want to understand how that text was actually forged, we have to look at the crucible it came out of.
We have to pivot to the medical reality.
Yeah, into his autobiography, Divine Schizophrenia. And there is a very specific date that acts as the hinge between the theology and the biology.
August 1st, 2018.
August 1st, 2018. In the spiritual text, this date is recorded in grand celestial terms. It is the moment the heavens opened.
But when you read his autobiography, Nathan strips away all the poetry.
He delivers the stark clinical reality. August 1st, 2018 was the date of his first severe psychotic break.
It is the Rosetta Stone for this entire deep dive.
The way he details the buildup to that break is just harrowing. It wasn't a sudden, random thought. It was deeply physiological.
The physical toll was immense.
He went days without sleeping. He was pacing the streets, feeling this unstoppable, terrifying surge of energy.
And in that state of exhaustion, the delusion locks in.
Right. He suddenly believes he is Messiah ben David, sent to physically save humanity.
Yeah.
I mean, how does the brain go from a lack of sleep to believing you are the savior of the world?
It really comes down to the mechanics of sleep deprivation and neurochemistry.
Okay, break that down for us.
When you don't sleep, your brain fails to clear out metabolic waste, specifically this compound called adenosine, and it skips the crucial process of pruning synapses during REM sleep.
So the brain is just physically suffocating in a way.
Basically, yeah. The brain becomes incredibly stressed. And in someone with a predisposition to schizophrenia, this stress triggers a catastrophic flood of dopamine, in the mesolimbic pathway.
And dopamine isn't just the reward chemical, right? Because we always hear about dopamine hits from social media.
Right, it's more complicated than that. It regulates how much attention we pay to things. It controls what we call salience.
Salience, like how important something is.
Precisely. Normally, dopamine spikes to tell your brain, hey, pay attention to this, it's important for survival.
Like seeing a snake in the grass.
Exactly. But during a psychotic break, the dopamine receptors are firing constantly at maximum volume. It creates a state of aberrant salience.
Aberrant salience. So everything feels important.
Everything. Suddenly, a discarded coffee cup on the street feels like it holds the secrets of the universe. The brain is drowning in the feeling that every single thing is profoundly, urgently meaningful.
That sounds absolutely exhausting.
It is, and the human brain hates a vacuum of logic. It tries to construct a narrative to explain why it feels this overwhelming divine importance.
So it just makes up a story to fit the feeling.
Yes. For Nathan, who was already steeped in a religious framework, the only narrative vast enough to hold that much neurological energy was, I must be the Messiah.
Wow. And that excess dopamine doesn't just construct narratives, it constructs entirely new realities.
The hallucinations.
Yeah, he describes a terrifyingly vivid hallucination from this period. He saw a faceless entity made of pure white light with massive wings of fire, and glowing on its head was a golden star of David.
It's a perfect example of how the visual cortex misfires and synthesizes cultural symbols.
What do you mean by synthesizes?
The brain is trying to render the internal chaos into something visible. So it grabs the universal archetype of divine power, wings of fire, blinding light, and slaps a highly specific cultural symbol, the Star of David, right on top of it.
So it's his own subconscious belief system projected outward.
Exactly. Rendered with absolute, terrifying realness by his own biology.
And that delusion, it violently bled into his actions.
It wasn't just a passive vision.
No, not at all. He describes walking the streets of Israel in the dead of summer. He's seeing hidden codes in the colors of passing cars and bus numbers.
Which goes back to that aberrant salience we talked about.
Right, and it peaks in this incredibly dangerous moment where he is running barefoot on the scorching summer asphalt. He actually gets struck by a car.
It's a miracle he survived that.
But because he believed his divine mission made him invincible, he didn't feel the pain. He just got up and kept running. How is that physically possible?
Well, in a state of extreme sympathetic nervous system arousal, the ultimate fight-or-flight response triggered by psychosis, the brain can actually shut down nociception.
Nociception, that's the perception of pain.
Right. Adrenaline and endorphins flood the system, masking the physical trauma so the body can escape a perceived threat.
Even if the threat is internal.
Exactly. But to Nathan, in that moment, this biological survival mechanism felt like definitive proof of his divine invincibility.
This is where I really have to pause and look at the danger here.
Yeah, it's a critical point.
Because if we look at BABASHUVA, the spiritual text, that ideology of uniting humanity wasn't a metaphor for him at that moment. It was a literal life or death mission.
It was an absolute imperative.
So isn't it incredibly dangerous to blur the lines between a medical emergency and a spiritual awakening? I mean, if a guy thinks he is the Messiah and runs into moving traffic, spirituality isn't saving him, it's actively threatening his life.
Absolutely.
This needs an emergency room, not a theological debate,
You are absolutely right to highlight the danger. And what makes Nathan's retrospective account so important is that he completely agrees with you.
He does.
Yes. He doesn't look back at the car hitting him and say, "Behold my miraculous strength." He looks back and says, "I was terrified and I was completely disconnected from reality."
So he sees the medical truth of it now.
Completely. He describes the psychotic break not as a joyful spiritual high, but as having his reality hijacked.
Hijack, that's a strong word.
He was sucked into a parallel world. The true horror of psychosis is the loss of sovereignty over your own senses. Your brain is actively lying to you, and you are trapped inside it.
The ultimate betrayal. You literally can't trust your own eyes.
Exactly.
So you wake up in a psychiatric ward and the doctors hand you a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. I mean, how do you possibly build a life knowing your mind has that capability?
Well, let's clarify the diagnosis first, because it's crucial to understand what he's up against.
Yeah, what's the difference between the two?
Schizophrenia involves the psychotic symptoms, the hallucinations, the delusions, the intense paranoia.
Right, the loss of reality.
Yes. But schizoaffective disorder means you have those psychotic symptoms, but layered on top of them is a severe mood disorder, like major depression or mania.
Oh, wow. So you get the hallucinations plus the crushing depression.
Exactly. It is an incredibly heavy, complex diagnostic burden to carry.
Which brings us to how Nathan chooses to carry that burden. He introduces this concept, and it's central to his whole philosophy. He calls it divine schizophrenia.
It's a fascinating reframing.
Yeah, because after the crisis, he refuses to just be a victim of a broken brain. He accepts the medical reality. I mean, he advocates for medication and therapy throughout the book.
He's very pro-science in that regard.
Very much so. But he reframes it. He argues that while his mind is distorted, that distortion acts as a unique prism.
A prism, I like that.
He says it allows him to perceive fundamental truths about human vulnerability and connection that people with healthy minds just completely overlook.
It is a profoundly necessary psychological reframing.
You think he needed to do that to survive?
Absolutely. If you accept the societal stigma that your mind is just broken, you lose all agency. By calling it divine schizophrenia, he takes the label used to marginalize him and weaponizes it for his own empowerment.
He owns it.
He is essentially saying, yes, there are cracks in my mind, but look at the incredible light that shines through those cracks.
It reminds me of an aggressively overtuned radio receiver.
How do you mean?
Well, if your mind is a radio, most of us have the squelch turned up. We only tune into the clear, primary stations we need to get through the day. Work, family, paying bills.
Right, the practical stuff.
But Nathan's squelch is turned all the way down. He's receiving every single signal in the atmosphere simultaneously.
The music and the static.
Exactly. He's getting the music, the static, the interference from the next town over, all at maximum volume. It is deafening and terrifying.
That's a great analogy.
But occasionally, because his receiver is so incredibly sensitive, he picks up a frequency of pure, profound empathy that the rest of us are completely tuned out of.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the mechanism. And the challenge of his daily life is trying to manage all that static.
Because it never really stops, does it?
No, the psychological burden is immense. Writing the texts, organizing his thoughts, it isn't just a creative outlet for him. It is a literal survival tactic. He uses writing to externalize the chaos.
He has this one metaphor in the autobiography that literally made me stop reading and just stare at the wall for a minute.
The Horcrux metaphor.
Yes. He references the concept of a Horcrux from the Harry Potter series, an object that holds a fragmented piece of a soul.
Right.
He describes a period where he had this intense, overwhelming urge to physically self-harm his own toe. And his internal logic was that he wanted to split his soul and put the pain into an external object.
That illustrates the absolute extreme of psychological fragmentation.
It's just so hard to wrap your head around.
Well, when you hear about self-harm in the context of severe mental illness, it is often misunderstood as simply a desire to die.
Right. People assume it's suicidal ideation.
But frequently, as Nathan articulates so clearly, it is a desperate physical attempt to externalize an inner pressure that has become too vast for the body to contain.
So the pain needs a place to go.
Exactly. The internal world is dissolving, the emotional pain is unquantifiable, and the urge to create a physical, localized wound is an attempt to create an anchor.
Wow.
The logic is, if I can see the pain on my toe, I can understand it. I can separate it from my core identity.
And out of that intense isolation and paranoia comes this incredible paradox. The disease tells him he is entirely alone, that the world is hostile and out to get him.
And his response?
His response, through his writing, is to scream to the world, no, under the flesh, we're all exactly the same.
It is a profound rebellion against his own symptoms.
It really is. But a philosophical rebellion isn't enough to get you through a Tuesday morning when the hallucinations are flaring up, right?
Yeah, you need practical tools.
Exactly. He needs a practical, physical toolbox to survive the day-to-day. So let's open that toolbox, because the way he manages the sensory input of his illness is fascinating.
He relies heavily on acoustics.
Yes, he specifically uses music, and not just as background noise while he's working. He uses it as a literal shield.
To understand why that works, we have to look at how auditory hallucinations actually function in the brain.
Okay, lay it on us.
He explains that a hallucination isn't always a booming voice from the clouds. Sometimes his brain misinterprets his own internal thoughts as external noises.
That is so creepy. Why does the brain do that?
Neurobiologically, there is a mechanism in a healthy brain called corollary discharge.
Corollary discharge, okay.
When you think a thought, Your brain sends a signal to your auditory cortex saying, hey, we generated this internally. Don't react to it as an outside sound.
So it tags it as safe.
Exactly. In schizophrenia, that corollary discharge mechanism breaks down.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The internal monologue gets routed through the auditory processing center without the self-generated tag. The result is that your own thoughts sound exactly like someone standing right behind you, shouting in your ear.
Which is horrifying. I can't even imagine. So Nathan counters this using competing sensory input.
He has to flood the system with something else.
He mentions a moment of overwhelming paranoia where he blasted a song called Fila by Omer Adam, who's an Israeli singer.
Right.
The song is about God, and he used the physical volume of the music to literally drown out the internally generated hallucinations. He's creating a sonic barrier of divine protection.
He is effectively hijacking his own auditory processing center.
How does that work?
If the brain is occupied processing the complex acoustics of a loud, culturally comforting song, it literally has less bandwidth to process the hallucinations.
It's like putting noise-canceling headphones on your own brain.
That's a great way to put it, but he actually evolves this strategy into something much more precise as time goes on.
Oh, yeah. The chakra frequency music.
Yes, this is where the spiritual meets the clinical in such a highly specific way.
He takes the Eastern mystical concept of chakras, the energy centers in the body,
Yeah.
and applies them to regulate his neurotransmitters and lower cortisol, the stress hormone.
He assigns specific Hertz frequencies to target specific psychiatric symptoms.
It's an incredible application of acoustic therapy. Let's look at the root chakra, for instance.
Okay, let's break that down.
In Eastern tradition, the root chakra represents grounding, right? Stability.
Correct. And in acoustic therapy, this corresponds to very low frequencies, typically around 396 hertz.
So Nathan uses these low frequencies when he is experiencing the extreme sensory overload of paranoia.
Mechanistically, this makes perfect sense. Low-frequency sound waves can actually stimulate the vagus nerve, which runs from the brainstem down through the abdomen.
The vagus nerve controls the parasympathetic nervous system, right? The rest and digest mode.
Exactly. When paranoia triggers his sympathetic fight or flight response, his heart rate spikes. The adrenaline is pumping.
So he uses the sound to fight the adrenaline.
By listening to the 396 hertz frequency, he is using sound to manually trigger the vagus nerve, forcing his autonomic nervous system to downregulate. It physically slows his heart rate and acts as an anchor.
That is brilliant. Then he moves up the spectrum depending on what he needs. He uses the heart chakra frequencies, which are around 639 hertz, and those are more harmonic. He uses these to foster self-love and combat the severe isolation of schizoaffective disorder.
Because the depression side of the illness is so isolating.
Right. Then he uses the throat chakra frequencies to help unblock his ability to express the tangled emotions of the psychosis.
And finally, the higher frequencies.
Yeah, the third eye and crown chakras. He uses those to find clarity and connect to his spiritual side safely without tipping over into a full-blown delusion.
He is basically utilizing principles similar to brainwave entrainment or binaural beats.
Brainwave entrainment, like syncing up your brain to a beat.
Exactly. By providing the misfiring brain with a continuous, predictable acoustic frequency, the brainwaves begin to sync to that rhythm. He is taking the ancient mystical language of energy and using it to perform highly targeted neurological regulation.
But the sheer willpower required to execute that strategy, that is what blows my mind.
It's a staggering amount of effort.
If your brain is aggressively lying to you, telling you demons are in the room or the world is ending, how do you focus enough to sit down, put on headphones, and meditate on a 396 hertz tone?
It's incredibly difficult.
It takes me 20 minutes to focus on a book if my neighbor is mowing the lawn.
Right. It requires an elite level of metacognition.
Metacognition, thinking about thinking.
Exactly. The ability to monitor and evaluate your own cognitive processes. Nathan has to simultaneously experience the visceral physical terror of a hallucination and rationally recognize that the terror is a false signal generated by a dopamine imbalance.
While the terror is still happening.
Yes. And then he has to forcefully redirect his attention to a sound wave. It is a monumental, exhausting act of discipline. He is fighting a war for the sovereignty of his own consciousness every single day.
And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we see that he isn't just fighting this war for himself.
No, he wants to share the tactical manual.
He zooms out and attempts to hand this survival guide to the rest of the world. He writes out his own 10 commandments for coping with mental illness.
And they're surprisingly unmystical, given his background.
They really are. They are deeply pragmatic,
The very first commandment is radical acceptance.
which is probably the hardest one.
Definitely. He stresses that you cannot fight the existence of the illness. You must accept it as a concrete, unchangeable reality of your biology, and only then can you begin to actively manage it.
The rest of the commandments focus on aggressive maintenance of the physical machine.
Treating the body to save the mind.
Right. He absolutely forbids drugs and alcohol, detailing how quickly they destabilize the fragile neurochemistry and just invite the psychosis right back in.
Which is common medical advice, but hearing it from someone on the inside hits differently.
It carries a lot more weight. He also emphasizes rigid routine, regulating your diet, and strictly enforcing a sleep schedule.
Because, as we discussed earlier, a tired brain skips the necessary maintenance.
And a tired brain is a vulnerable brain.
Routine is the ultimate anchor for a mind prone to chaos. If the internal world is unpredictable, the external world must be rigidly predictable to compensate.
And then there's the practice of gratitude. But it's not that toxic positivity stuff.
No, it's very granular.
Granular mindfulness, yeah. He talks about being genuinely thankful for a quiet cup of coffee or just a simple text message from his mother.
Finding peace in the mundane.
Exactly. Because if you know firsthand that your mind is capable of creating literal monsters and wings of fire, a boring, quiet cup of coffee isn't mundane. It is a miracle.
It's a reprieve. All of this builds to his ultimate plea to society.
Which is so passionate.
He demands that we stop framing mental illness as a moral failing or a character flaw or a lack of spiritual faith.
That's a huge stigma in a lot of religious communities.
It is, but he insists it is an illness of the brain, a biological organ, just like the pancreas or the lungs. You wouldn't blame someone for having asthma.
He actually uses the pseudonym Angel Leo to publish parts of his story specifically to prove that a person's worth isn't defined by a societal label.
How so?
He's basically saying, society looks at my medical chart and sees paranoid schizophrenic and just assumes I have nothing left to offer. I am proving them wrong by creating this art and this philosophy.
And when you step back and look at the totality of his work, the two texts merge perfectly.
They really do.
The medical advocacy he outlines in his autobiography is the exact same message as the prophetic vision in BABASHUVA.
Wait, expand on that. How are they the same?
The empathy he demands for the person struggling in the psychiatric ward is the exact same empathy he demands for humanity to stop fighting border wars.
Oh, wow.
When he says, under the flesh we are all human, it is a medical truth and a spiritual prophecy simultaneously.
That is beautiful. He took the exact same illness that builds these massive walls of paranoia, and he used it as the raw material to build a bridge of radical empathy.
It's a testament to human resilience.
We've traced his path from the biblical heights of a spiritual manifesto down to the terrifying, dopamine-flooded reality of a psychotic break.
It's quite a journey.
We've seen how the oldest texts in the world and the specific frequencies of a sound wave can be used to hold a fractured mind together.
It fundamentally forces us to reconsider the boundaries of the human mind, honestly, and what we classify as broken versus what we classify as visionary.
Which leaves you, the listener, with one final lingering thought to explore on your own.
Something to mull over.
We spend billions of dollars, and rightfully so, trying to medicate away the symptoms of severe mental illness, trying to seal up the cracks in a fractured mind so it can function in normal society.
Of course, that's the goal of modern psychiatry.
But if a mind navigating the absolute terror of paranoid schizophrenia can produce a vision of peace and unyielding human connection that is vastly more compassionate than what most quote-unquote healthy minds produce on a daily basis.
That really makes you wonder.
What does that say about our rigid definitions of sanity? Is it possible that the very cracks in perception we rush to fix are sometimes the only places where the light of genuine radical empathy manages to get in?